History has certainly shown that even the most intuitive criminal investigator can be wrong from time to time. But if I am mistaken, if the lieutenant is indeed a woman, as she claims to be, then, my friend, she is suffering from the worst case of hemorrhoids I have ever seen! That's why Roger Podacter is dead! He found Captain Winky!
Yeah, we'll check out, I'm excited for the rest of Euphoria. Early in the episode, in Fez's place, he had a poster, and it was a movie that's very, very popular. But looking back, it could be seen as kind of like whitewashing, where we talked about. So Suge, problematic movies, generally what people think or what you think, but you can't help but love it.
Yeah.
So what's your...
Yeah, so I was thinking about this all the day because I was just on the train and I was thinking to myself, I'm surprised they haven't gone after it just as yet. And I mean, it's a movie that, you could come after it like a million different ways because of its subject matter. But this actually has to do more with the actor than it does with the... Because it's going to be like two movies, but actually it's the same actor and both of them are directed by the same person. So I was thinking about Al Pacino in Scarface and Carlito's Way. In Scarface, he's playing a Cuban immigrant, and in Carlito's Way, he's playing Boricua, like New York, Puerto Rican person. And they're both still great, well-loved movies, but, in this era of, representation, the new West Side Story, I think that's where I got the idea from this. The new West Side Story, of course, in the older one, they had Natalie Wood in dark makeup. They had, didn't even realize one of the Georges that were discussed in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, George Papyrus, I think, or Kakaris. Well, he's Greek and he played Maria's brother in the original, so he's Greek and they made him up with like dark makeup. So they tried to rectify that in this new remake by Steven Spielberg, where all the Hispanic characters would be played by actual Hispanic people. So I'm surprised, like a lot of people haven't gone after Scarface and Carlito's Way or gone after like Al Pacino personally, much in the same way like Hank Azaria and Mike Henry. Yeah, like how they've kind of had their reckoning where it's like, yeah, you're like white guys playing black guys and Indian guys and et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting. And I mean, like, to be fair, it's not like Al Pacino made a career out of it. Like, he went on to keep on playing like Hispanic characters while being an Italian man. But to me, I think like his dialects I've always said it because people would think that Al Pacino would just be like, all right, I'm just doing like a Spanish, like a Latin accent in these movies, and it would just be like a universal Latin accent. But it's like, if you watch Scarface, like he does like the accent of a Cuban person who barely knows English.
My kid's sister don't have to work in no beauty parlor. And Mama, she don't have to sew in no factory. Just some made it, Mama.
The same dialect and everything. And then if you watch Carlito's Way,
Kid, because that's all you hear in the joint. Oh man, I didn't have a chance. No, bullshit. I was already a mean little bastard while my mother was alive, and I know it.
like he very much sound like, if you go to like Washington Heights, like he could sound like a lot of the middle-aged like Puerto Rican people or in the South Bronx that you hear. So he like, you got to give him credit. Like he did his homework on preparing for the roles. And I just thought it's interesting that those movies, they haven't been canceled yet, but he's, I still love it, and I still love it for what it is, if that makes sense.
But that's acting.
Yeah.
There's a borderline. This is another discussion that's happening. Like you mentioned West Side Story. You mentioned how they actually having like Latin actors in it, like kind of rectify the original movie. But now I saw an article where it's like it shouldn't be Spielberg. It should be like they're going into not even the actors where it's like this can Steven Spielberg make West Side Story? That's one article I read from a Boricua or actually a Puerto Rican person in like film. So that's what I'm getting at with that where it's like with Apu too. They wanted to have writers maybe give people who Indian background people be able to talk about give more authenticity. It's like giving opportunities. It's not just the performers. It's like people behind the camera. That's kind of like the next step that that's like a movement now because like it's great having like one person like a little group of people that play a lot of characters that are people of color, but there's so many more positions. If you look at the end credits on shows, there's like 100 people that work on like a movie or like a TV production, and that's kind of like the next step for that. Yeah, with Scarface and Carlito's Way, would it have to be like should it have been a Cuban person playing Scarface because if the character's like that, or just like Latin? That's another thing where I always think about. It's like you mentioned like Pacino has like the actual the accent of like a New Yorker, like a Puerto Rican New Yorker. How do you feel about that? Would it be just like you mentioned how like Pacino doesn't do like a general accent, like it's more like authentic with the actor? What do you think? Like, would it have to be someone from literally like a New Yorker who's Puerto Rican? Like, get what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think about that?
That's like an interesting thing too, because I remember like it was some controversy just recently with the in the Heights. Something like me and Joel had talked about. I mean, not in the Heights, but we were just talking about like colorism in the Latin community, where it's like even in the Latin community, like there are Latinos who are dark skinned, like Joel, who aren't being represented in media, or it's thought that Latino characters are meant to look fairer skinned, lighter skinned, and not dark skinned. There's no way that they could look this way. And yeah, I guess it's an idea that it's not monolithic. Like if you encountered like a Colombian person, like they may look similar to a Cuban person, but they have a whole different culture. Same thing with Dominicans, same thing with Puerto Ricans. Like obviously, if you grew up in New York, there is a distinct difference between Puerto Rican people and Dominican people. And to them, if you confuse the two, there will be a problem,
Yeah, and generations, let's say like European too, though that culture was distinct. Like there would be like neighborhoods, like especially in New York, it was very distinct and it was very segregated, even between like Europeans. But as generations go by, like it's just you get like the label is just like it's just white. But like those cultures right next to each other, like a Greek and Italian, like they're completely different. But then later, as time goes by, you get that's the whole melting pot thing. But but like in Latin America, there's like distinct, like even like me and you, everyone like learns like Spanish like in school. But you can say something like if you're a Spaniard and you say something to someone, it has completely different connotation to like a Mexican. Like if you say something, there's that. I think like a Mexican could say something like, "Oh, use like slang," but if you say that to like a Spanish person, like Spain, like they're gonna take their glove off and like smack you. Like you said, what'd you say about my mother? But like Mexicans would be like, "Man, fuck you, man," like that. Like that's how it comes off. So it's very distinct.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like one of them things you'd have to go to like the Cuban community and ask them about Scarface. You'd have to go to the Puerto Rican community and ask them about Carlito's Way. Like James Caan, no drop of Italian blood in his body, I think. And when he did Godfather and he played Sonny, like he would get awards and recognition from like Italian associations and political groups and stuff like that for his portrayal of an Italian person. So, it would be an interesting question to them because I it's much like the thing with like Apu, where it's like, people thought there wasn't an issue, but people weren't asking the people, or the people who had an issue with it didn't have, a big enough voice or platform to speak out against it. So it'd be interesting to see if, like, all these years, like, Scarface has been celebrated and people was like, nah, man, like, for one, like, he's not Cuban, so we don't even like respect that portrayal. For Puerto Ricans, oh, like, they'd be okay, I'm reloaded, or you using lines from like Carlito's Way with them. It's like, nah, dude, like, we don't like that because he's not Puerto Rican. So it'd be an interesting conversation for them to be had. What movie did you have, or what movies?
All right, so this is like this is not like a race thing. It's a different thing that's also talked about a lot. A movie I grew up on, and before I saw this movie, or maybe the sequel, I was just like a regular kid. I was like 6, whatever. And I saw this movie, and I became like the class clown. Like not class clown, not like a fool, but I started like using humor as like kind of like my way to like build relationships and everything. And I idolized this guy in the '90s, Jim Carrey, Ace Ventura.
Right.
That's been talked about like transphobia.
Right.
You've read about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also, there's a scene where they're in like he plays like a mentally handicapped person, and nowadays like that's problematic.
Right.
I grew up on this movie, and I didn't really like like empathy for other people, like placing yourself, the ability to separate your own experience from and then like someone else's, which is like if you go on Twitter, people are only like, oh, that never happened to me. It's like anecdotal, but having the ability to separate yourself. And what if there's a kid growing up, like our age, whatever, who had those like feelings where like they were like, I was supposed to be born like a woman, and everyone's laughing about it, and that could be like mentally exhausting. And like you think about this all the time, and that leads to a lot of issues down the line with the transphobia. Like the biggest joke is that Einhorn like made out with like all the guys, or just like had sexual things with all the guys, and they're all like, oh, like disgusting, throwing up. But on the flip side, Jim Carrey, I read an article where he's like, okay, yeah, I understand. Looking back, it's like problematic, but it was so over the top that Ace Ventura is supposed to be the butt of the joke, less so than just like making fun of like a trans person. Like it's like so over the top. Like he's a plunger, and of course it's like a, what do you call that again? A crying game spoof, pretty much, because they play the music and everything. But it's so over the top. But but still, these movies we grew up on, like you wonder and you go back and you're like, like Revenge of the Nerds, I watched it every day, and there's like a rape scene in it. It's like, it's hard that we didn't really acknowledge that. It was like either a punchline or just a throwaway moment in a movie. You agree with that, like comedies?
Yeah,
that we grew up
I
on,
mean, we talked about it too when we, the John Hughes, where several of the things in his movies were like, yeah, like you can't do or say certain things anymore, or things that were in those movies. You're like, oh, it's kind of it was funny, but now in retrospect, it isn't. And I think Ace Ventura, obviously, with the Ray Finkel, Einhorn thing, is something that hasn't aged well. And even to that, I don't even like that term, like age well. I think as society, we progress, Last night I was watching Jungle Cruise with Emily Blunt and The Rock, and it's set in 1916, and a lot of its like humor was set behind the fact that Emily Blunt's character like couldn't really speak amongst men because this was pre 18th Amendment, and her brother was gay. And I thought it was a significant thing in a Disney movie to kind of like showcase that, where he talked about, I think he was talking to the Ross character about how like he had to turn down like women's offers, to women offering, or parents offering their daughters to him because he was gay. And other the only person who stood by him through his closeted thing was his sister, and that's why he follows his sister everywhere she goes, because she's the only person that respects him, and he and essentially is like the Like she's the voice, and he's her messenger basically. Like he goes up and he says the things that she's written in front of crowds. My point with saying that is just like that's a movie set in the early 20th century, and it's something you could make as like, kind of like the background of the film, because society since then has progressed. And I think society since Ace Ventura has progressed. That's why we can have a show like Euphoria, and every time Jules is on the screen, it's like, oh, she used to be a boy. Like it's just like that's just Jules, that's just Hunter Schafer. And us as a society just sees her as a person, and I like obviously people wouldn't make that joke today, and that's the great thing about it. But this is, the point of this whole segment is just that, these are certain films where it's like, yeah, like Scarface and Carlito's Way. And I think they were doing like a Scarface like remake, and it was supposed to have Diego Luna, who's Mexican American, and he was gonna play, like they were gonna make the Scarface character Mexican. I don't know if they're still doing our film, if they already aren't, but yeah, it was remade from the 30s into the 80s, but they were planning on doing like another version, and last I heard he was the person, and they were actually gonna get a Hispanic character to play him. But I'm saying like the point of this whole thing is like we could like I'm still watching those movies, and I'm still enjoying it. And it's the same thing with Ace Ventura. And like the thing I kind of hate is that, a movie like Ace Ventura, like, or a movie like Breakfast Club with the scenes with Judd Nelson and Molly Ringwald, every other day, it's like some article that's like, yeah, you can't enjoy this anymore. And it's like, no, I can't enjoy it. And I could also be mature about it and realize that in the real world, these things wouldn't pass. You can't just, stick your head in a girl's crotch and then eventually she's gonna fall in love with you. It doesn't work like that. You can't antagonize a person because they had a sex change and make like a whole like comedy routine about it. But in the movie, the whole plot of the whole plot of the movie was that it was this guy that blew the Super Bowl for the Dolphins and basically was ostracized by ostracized in the one thing that he loved, which was football, because he blew this game. And he blamed it on Dan Marino because Dan Marino didn't hold the ball right or whatever. So in order for that person to, live life, they had a sex change and then live life as a woman and sought revenge.
Like it was like
one would, yeah.
Yeah, like it was like a not a punishment, but it was like a shameful thing. Well, anyway, like yeah, of course, like I love that movie.
The movie is it's called Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, so there had to be some kind of like mystery. If like Ray Finkel was still a man, it would kind of be, like there wouldn't be an aha moment, because obviously all the people that like they interviewed Dan Marino and all the other Dolphins would be like, oh, that guy's Ray Finkel in the movie. Like, so you had to add in, it's part of the plot. I mean, is it in poor taste, like the vomiting and the him like spitting, like dry heaving when he realized like he made out with her.
The shower.
Yeah,
clean myself. No,
yeah,
but I can still enjoy it. I can separate myself. I can separate time, because it was almost 29 years ago it came out. But I can separate it. Same thing with like the John Hughes, like Six and Candles and Breakfast Club. I can separate it. One of my favorite characters was like kind of like a punchline, sort of, in like Revenge of the Nerds. He was a nerd just because he was like a black gay man, sort of. Like he hung out with the outside, with the like the fringe people, like the nerds. So you saw someone. Let's say you're like gay. You saw someone, and but it was kind of like a comic relief. I saw another movie recently where they showed they had like a diverse cast, but like I guess a token like gay black man was like kind of like the joke, but I can separate it. And hey, sometimes that could be who you are. Like that could be like you're like a you joke around and stuff, but after a while you got to get more complex characters. I watched the Hitchcock TV show, like the Hitchcock Hour, and the only black person you saw was the guy handling the luggage in the train station. But that's how it was. My mom tells me, like in the 50s and 60s, like that's how it was. Like you saw people on TV, and then eventually it got more complex, and 50 years go by, and now we're talking about representation for different groups. So it just keeps on going. But I can separate myself. I can separate everything. I can still enjoy that. Again, you said you don't believe cancel culture isn't like a thing. It's like the market, like you said a while ago, like the market will.
The market dictates your necessity.
Yeah, right. So like you can watch it, you can enjoy it. It's not gonna. It doesn't need like a whole backlash where it's like, no, you can't take this away from me. Same thing with Marvel. I'll wrap this up with this. Like fictional characters, they recast them, not they recast them, but like they cast people that in the fictional world, like or like let's say Michael Clark Duncan played Kingpin, and people I remember like 20 years ago they were like, but Kingpin's, that's not Kingpin. Fictional characters, you have the freedom to cast whatever, but people have like so much backlash at that.
And it's
that's
like
a,
you
that's
have
a
to
problem.
do the Ben Affleck and Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back. You understand? These are fictional characters. Fictional characters.
Yeah, he uses that, but that's real. I mean, we've seen that the last like 15 years and 20 years of people that grew up reading something. They like, oh, you're taking this away from me. No, you can still enjoy it. You can go back and read comics and old movies and stuff. It doesn't wipe away everything. It just progresses and it becomes more complex and try different things. Like it explores other avenues, and that allows like a show like Euphoria where it's not your typical like tropes and characters. That's why Suge, you love it. It's one of my favorite shows that's going on now because you don't know what's going to happen next.